I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located in the traditional territories of the Shishel and Squamish peoples. Directors, we have an agenda in front of us. Is there any additions or deletions to this agenda before I look for a motion to adopt, please? If not, may I have a motion to adopt? Moved, seconded, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. First up on our agenda, item 3 is a motion to go in camera, that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 90, 1, D, E, G, K, M, and 2B of the community charter. May I have a motion, please? Moved, seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried. We will go in camera and we'll be back when we're done, hopefully 20 to 30 minutes. And welcome back to the the special committee of the whole for Thursday, July 17th, 2025. It's 2:55. We've concluded our in-camera session, and so we're going to proceed with the open part of our agenda. Can I have a motion to receive the reports, please? Moved, seconded, all those in favor? That is carried. And with that, we're going to move on to item 5.1 in the agenda, which is water supply capacity, updated objectives, and scenario analysis. And we'll turn it over to GM Rosenboom.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. On January 11, staff presented a report to the board with options with scenario analysis on how to address the current water supply deficit for the Chapman system. And subsequently, staff have been working on developing some draft water objectives for the board's consideration to be included in the water strategy. The analysis completed in January had some very preliminary objectives included, and staff are here today to present some results of an analysis it completed over the last several months. And I've prepared a small presentation to guide the board through the quite lengthy report and through the analysis completed. So I'm going to share my screen and I hope that it will also show up somewhere on the big screen. And it does. Thank you, Christy. Everybody is in a sigh of relief. Okay. So it's really about balancing demand and supply. That's why the two pictures here. It's about how much additional supply do we need, supply capacity do we need to meet which community demand. Now see if my laptop also would like to collaborate with me. Yes. So including water objectives in the SCRD's water strategy for the next 10 years would confirm the level of service the SCRD aims to provide to the community in terms of water supply. It also enables the SCRD to confirm how much additional water supply it actually needs to be developed in over the next several years to meet item number 1. So the January 13th report and also this report has actually 3 types of objectives included. One, that there is sufficient water supply if there's a period of very minimal rain between May 1st and November 31st. And that time frame has been selected based on climate change projections and past history in terms of the earliest we actually saw drought starting on the coast. And I think everybody remembers when we had our first big rain shower in 2022, which was actually early December. So that's why this period is selected. Second objective is that there is a basic water supply capacity for all users in case of an emergency situation. And I'll come to that later to explain what staff are proposing to be considered as an emergency situation. And the third one is there's a regulatory compliance for the full duration of a drought related to the environmental flow requirements for Chapman Creek and Soames Creek. So the report has this graph in it, and I will walk you through it. So currently we have a community demand on can you see my mouse? Yes, you can. Let's say hypothetical, this is the entire community demand at the moment, and our available supply is not at the same level. So water conservation efforts like leak resolution, volumetric drilling, and water regulations will reduce the demand, but at the same time, there's still a gap that needs to be fixed by increasing supply. That's during the summer. Similar can be said during an emergency situation. It's highly likely that during an emergency situation, the demand can be further reduced by increasing additional water conservation regulations, going to stage 4, for example, which would further reduce the demand, but still there is additional supply required to meet that demand at that time. These graphs are not particularly for one of the SRD water systems, but more to explain the concept of how, that we need to balance and that we need to work on both sides of the equation. So in terms of the extended dry summers, staff have been, the graph on the right has all the monthly residential use for all SRD water systems, excluding Eastbourne. So if you, for the residential meters, where residential properties that have meters, every year, every month, we are doing the meter reads. Those data have been used to produce this graph. And what you can see is that there are some spikes in an order of magnitude of 14,000 liters a day on average. Those are all during periods when we were in stage 1. And there are some other spikes or data which are related to situations where we're in stage 2. The stage 2 situations usually are when we are getting close to 1,000 liters a day on average for all systems, and stage 1 is about 1,400 liters a day. And I have to say, stage 2 means that stage 2 is cold, and that's of course not the case for all SRD water systems. So even when we say stage 2 here, it's stage 2 in the region, in the Chapman water system, which is of course the biggest system, so it will have the biggest impact on this graph. So that's why we use them. So residential use the residential demand makes up the vast majority of the entire demand on the coast at any given point in time. Water meters are read once a month, so using the monthly residential water use as an indicator, the average thereof, is a good indicator to be used to as kind of for objective setting in terms of what our supply could look like in the future. Volumetric billing and leak resolution are expected to reduce in a reduction of our demand of about 20 to 30%. So in this case, I took stage 2 water conservations when they were in effect. The average use per connection was about 1,000 liters a day, 20-30% of that to reduce from that. Then you're coming to 750 liters a day as a potential objective for the SRD to consider moving forward. However, it would mean that stage 2 would be the maximum that would ever be called, but it's not that stage 2, it's out of the question. Stage 2 should then be considered to be called on a regular basis. In terms of emergency supply, staff are recommending to define an emergency situation where, one, or in the case of Chapman System 2, Church Road and as well as Chapman, of the primary water sources for a water system can no longer be used. That can, for example, be because the intake is out of commission, there's a well is out of commission, there's a treatment plant is not functioning anymore, or some of the key transmission mains, for example, from more towards the Seashell area towards the Roberts Creek area, has been broken. And situation that could lead to such a situation could be a plane crash in Chapman watershed, an earthquake, natural disasters, landslides that resulting in our intake to be out of commission, etc., etc. There's a variety of reasons that could lead to one or two of the primary water sources to be out of commission. The population, especially on Chapman system, is so large that staff don't consider that alternative ways of providing water to that many people on the coast is really realistic. It might be for pockets, but if, for example, Chapman would go down, it would be rather impossible, A, to get all the water from Church Road towards the Seashield area, and to be sufficient that the entire Seashield area can also be fed by that. So for that perspective, we would say we need to account for that. In the winter, the residential demand is on average about 400 liters a day. It's a little bit above that, but at its lowest, it's about 400. In an emergency situation, we feel that it is reasonable that even that can be reduced further. So 400 liters a day is what we also saw during stage 4, extended stage 4 at the end of 2022. So that means that at that time there was only very limited outdoor use still happening. So we feel that that most of that water would be was used for commercial or residential indoor use. So during an emergency situation, I think it's reasonable to expect that that can be even reduced further to 350 liters a second. Of course, environmental flow needs. Chapman Creek, I think everybody knows that we have an environmental flow there, requirement there for 200 liters a second. And Soames Creek, it fluctuates depending on the month of the year between 15.5 and 22.7 liters per second. How can we meet that objective in 2035 for the Chapman water system, which of course the system that has currently the biggest water deficit? Emergency siphon systems, we have EFN optimization project on the go to see if we can optimize the EFN for Chapman Creek. We're doing active leak resolution, volumetric billing. We're considering the construction of a Langdale well field, Lower Crown Reservoir, of course, in partnership with the Seashield Nation, and hospital well field. Phase 1 is more actively pursued at the moment, and phase 2, up to the maximum flow, could be considered at some point in the future. We use for this analysis the same model that we used in January for the report as presented in January, and it's based on current available information. And there's a lot of assumptions and data gaps that we had to fill in to make this happen, including about potential yields from sources as well as financial implications. There's a 10-year outlook. We assumed that volumetric billing and leak resolution would result in a 20% reduction of demand. As I just indicated, we anticipated it would be between 20 and 30, so we used a more conservative approach here. We took an average annual growth of the population on the Sunshine Coast on the water systems of 2% over those 10 years, annually 2%. And we considered the impacts by climate change by not only extending the periods that the water would need to be provided to the community, but also with very limited amount of rain and high evaporation over the period of time. I have to note that each of these water supply sources, each of the larger ones, will still have a lot of critical dependencies. There's permitting requirements, there's funding to be approved, there's electoral approvals to be obtained, and land use agreements to be negotiated. So there's a lot of dependencies for each of these systems. So what are the findings in terms of for the extended dry summers? The impact of volumetric billing and leak resolution could actually almost balance out the impacts of growth for the SRD for over the next 10 years, which is, I think, a positive message. The siphon system in Edwards Lake and Chapman Lake are critical to maintain the Chapman Creek event requirements during extended periods of time, extended summer. If we were to be able to use the siphon systems for the next 10 years, one additional large water supply source would provide sufficient capacity to meet the average demand during the extended dry summer. That one source could be Langdale well field, hospital well field, or Lower Crown Reservoir. Further analysis is required to confirm if one additional source would also be sufficient in peak demand situation, because the analysis completed to date are about average per month. But There will be times during the day or certain days of the year, of the month, especially when there are, for example, firefighting requirement that we might need more capacity. Maybe the board members last year when there was a fire at one of the commercial properties here in Porpoise Bay, and we had to immediately ramp up Church Road to almost max capacity to provide sufficient fire to that water to fight the fire. So the average demand might be able to, we might be able to meet that with one additional source. Further assessment needs to be required if are required to see if we can also meet the peak demand for that. A second large additional source could also provide additional operational and financial benefits. The financial benefits would include that we can activate the source which we can provide water to the community in the cheapest way. So we can actually select sources based on its cost. If continued use of siphons is not approved, we would at least need 2 additional large water supply sources to meet the summer demand during a stage 2 situation. And further analysis required to confirm if even a third one might be required to meet the peak demand. And there's almost no impact of potential reduction in EFN on a water supply in this situation. In terms of emergency water supply, it should be noted that Lower Crown, because it's dependent on Chapman Creek water treatment plant, for that to be valid emergency supply, we need to have the plant running as well. So if there's a natural disaster or another event that takes out the plant, then still Lower Crown cannot be used as an emergency water supply. However, one additional large water source could provide sufficient capacity to meet the demand during an emergency situation. Same as so if there would be one source developed for summer supply, that source would also be sufficient to provide the 350 liters a second a day objective for emergency situations. However, a second large additional source would provide the desired redundancy for the system. Staff did some very high-level assessment of cost. They're included in the report and presented here just for information. So some of the development costs and operational costs are all very much in early stages, but you can see that the operational costs fluctuate a lot between the sources and the different projects. And I have to say these are the additional costs on top of the current cost. So, for example, a Langley well field could cost between $1 and $1.50 an additional cost per cubic meter compared to the current situation. What could be next? Confirmation of water supply objectives in the water strategy. Advance active water supply expansion projects. Of course, we need to advance those and see what their visibility is in terms of technical, permitting, funding, and agreement with partners. Oh, there's a switch around here. More detailed analysis on the water supply to make sure that we actually can meet the peak demands under each of the scenarios. And then that all can be included in the actual S30 water supply capacity strategy to guide the development of the actual infrastructure plans to support those. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, GM Rosenboom. And I do have my speaker's control panel open here, so I will try to balance between virtual hands and real hands. Director Bax, I see you're first.
So my question has to do with the recommendation as it appears in section 1. It states that the water supply capacity for all systems is such that an average monthly residential water demand of 750 liters per connection can be guaranteed. Now, is that supposed to read per connection per day?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not a monthly average. Okay, because I did work it out and it does, it leaves you about 18 liters a day for things like dishes and flushing the toilet. So we're gonna correct that, are we?
Well, we haven't made any recommendations yet, so whoever moves the recommendations can add that in.
Well, I'm not moving the
So if-
recommendations,
so if they so feel.
recommendations just yet.
The draft report said per user, so it might have been lost in the update for the final report. Director McMahon.
Yes, I noticed the same thing too. I do think we should set targets, and I particularly liked the recommendation on page 6 that we review this objective in 2030. And I actually thought perhaps we should include that with the recommendations as presented. But I'm not yet comfortable with that 750 liter figure, because I know that our averages in the SCRD are severely skewed by the high-end users, where we've had it shown to us that over 30% of our water is being used by less than 5% of the connections, right? And so that makes the average look really unrealistically high, whereas most of the residents, the vast majority, are well under that average. So I worry that our a goal is not ambitious enough. Water is expensive. We're asking ourselves two questions here. How much water is enough, and how much taxes are too much? And every additional source we add, while I think we do need the redundancy, comes with a lot of cost for a relatively small tax base. I personally have no difficulty with stage 3, because stage 3 is mildly inconvenient. It doesn't shut down businesses. It doesn't entirely shut down outdoor watering. And I think that if our objective is to supply indoor needs and modest outdoor needs, that's not a big problem. We have to all recognize that water is expensive and we have to use it efficiently. So the other difficulty I had with this report was having a single objective for all the systems, because they are different and their resilience is different. And Eastbourne, of course, is a complete outlier, but North and South Pender are a somewhat different situation than the Chapman situation, the Chapman system. So I wonder if staff looked at setting different objectives for different systems, just bearing how realistic it is. Aha.
So I know that Eastbourne is not included in this because they're a special creature with their extremely limited water supply. And it's interesting, just before I go to GM Rosenboom, I think setting objectives for different water systems at different rates, I worry about how it could be construed as an equity piece. Like we're punishing you if you live in one system versus another, Eastbourne aside, obviously. But I'll go to GM Rosenboom, and then I've got some comments on oh, my apologies, CAO.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to make sure there was a clear understanding as to why this is in front of the board. I think it's clear as we review our water supply and as we make progress and we want to move forward with our water strategy and the various subsequent policy documents, it's important for us to have a target for us to be working towards, because right now we don't. And that lack of clarity is, I think, or if we have some clarity, even if it's not perfect, would help communications, messaging, policy documents. And I don't think it's meant to encumber us and/or to discredit some of the conservation type of signaling that we want, because those are actually some of the subsequent policy documents. It's that we have to start somewhere. And so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to find a perfect goal. I think there are some continuous conversations that need to be had. We probably could debate this for a very long time, and in the absence of a target, it makes some of our subsequent work in policy and communication quite difficult, because it is quite abstract right now, and we have diverged from having that target since 2013, when we had our comprehensive regional water strategy, water dialogues. If anyone was here to recollect what those were, we were filling up buckets and we were signaling how much it cost to fill the buckets. Those were good tools and tactics for us to communicate to the public, but we have not had those tools and tactics to be able to message to our community as to what we're working towards, and for us to be able to show and demonstrate progress in making water supply a priority, which is in your strategic plan. So I think staff are trying to bring some contemplation based on the information we have right now. Definitely, we could massage some of the recommendations to provide some comfort into at least having signaling that we want to make some progress towards it. So just wanted to provide that. Thank you, Chair.
GM Rosenboom.
Thank you. In addition to the remarks from the CEO, it's the purpose of the water supply objectives is to make sure that we build sufficient capacity. It's not to say that it's an efficiency target for a community to be that we want all our community to use 750 liters per day per connection. No, I think our communication strategy needs to be reduce, because if we don't meet that, if you don't need to use all the 750 liters per day per connection on average by 2035, then we don't need to build any new supplies for the maybe 5 or next 10 years afterwards. So conservation will continue to be an objective, but we know that we have to construct additional water supply sources, and it's just a matter of that we know that we at least build something that set an objective so that we know where to work towards, as the CEO just indicated. And at the same time, water conservation continues to be a priority. And if we can achieve 30% reduction because of leak resolution and volumetric billing, because primarily the high water users are going to use less water, and they are now the ones that are causing the peak, I think we all would say, great.
Thank you, GM Rosenboom. I think that's a lot of where I was going to go, is that we have to stick something on the page in order to be able to work to it and do some of the other calculus that we want our staff to do. And yeah, if we can get peak consumption down and our average demand down, then right, it delays additional sources or, things of that nature. 750 liters per connection averages sort of, based on 200 liters per person per day, which is what we're messaging right now, is only 3.75 people in a household, which is higher than our average, right? The average is 2.1. But like I'm a household of 4, for example, right? And so I don't think it's fair to say that we can only guarantee water supply if you guys can all meet these, 200 liter targets now. And especially as we do more work on leak resolution and education, volumetric billing, I would say if we only achieve 20% reduction with the introduction of volumetric billing, we may have done something wrong, because I think it's going to come way further down than that once people start paying. Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up to that, or I'll move through the speakers list?
I'll come back for another round.
Okay. Director Stanford.
Thank you. Yeah, listening to this, I think one of the other values to this kind of document is really reminding people we still don't have enough water supply. I think there's still a general sense that I often hear that, oh, well, that was just a one-off, it was a bad year. In general, if we are good, we will be fine. But it's really emphasizing the future planning and also that we aren't at our capacity, and we need to have a reliable water supply and what that means. So I found that valuable. But I hate to keep going back to that 750 liters, but it's more of a communication thing. What does that mean? Does that include, obviously, residential usage? Does it include the EFN? Does it include fire pressure? Does it include industrial use? We're talking about high users. Regional district is one of those high users. And yet we are trying to maintain assets. So we have a legitimate use, so do other big users. So we can't reduce into ad infinitum. So I just want to make sure what that 750 liters per connection, what does it include?
Thank you, Chair. So the 750 liters per connection per day is based on the actual meter data that we're collecting currently at people's property. So what we would do is we would use that, multiply by the number of connections on the system, and add to that the demand, the projected demand for industrial, for commercial, for institutional, for fire flow capacity, et cetera, to ultimately confirm what the actual capacity is that we need a new supply source to be, that it would have. So, but the reason for staff to propose to focus on the residential is because it's the largest amount of, it's the biggest driver for the total use, and it's an indicator that is as close to the actual user, to the taxpayer, as I have. I can talk about, oh yeah, that equates to 70 million cubes at the treatment plant, but that's a number that doesn't resonate anywhere, and I think this is at least as close to the most of the users as we have, and we can report on this on a monthly basis, and people can look up this number in the future on SRD Online and can see how they relate to this number or to any water conservation target we set, and they can look at this number online. This is the number that will be communicated in the future. So that's why staff were proposing to use this kind of as an indicator for water supply capacity.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Director Lee next.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions was just answered, and that was where the 750 come from, because it seemed high. So it's a reality figure from the meters. I will point out that we've had stage 3 during those peaks as well. So I suspect, was it just last year alone, or did you look at 2022 as well? So you took an average of the whole works. I'm pretty sure that's what it was if I looked at the graph. Is that correct?
I looked at the months and the water use during the times that, for example, in July 2022, we were in stage 2 until late July. So I took that number, which was about close to 1,000 liters per connection per day.
My point being is it could be easily conservative because we haven't hit the worst forecasted yet by our experts. 2022, I believe, was 170 days, and we could easily have had 2-something according to them. So I consider that a fairly conservative figure, actually. And then I also wanted to point out that we're doing the water system modeling and long-term source studies as the next studies. And those will provide us with the data we need for the individual systems like North Pender, South Pender, Egmont, Earls Cove. That's where I think we'll get that kind of stuff from. I would be interested to see if I have that correct.
GM Rosenboom.
Thank you. Yeah, further work is being undertaken, for example, on South Pender and in a way, certain way as well on North Pender. And also as a answer to a question from Director McMahon earlier, I think there is further work required on some of the other systems, including Eastbourne. What is a reasonable objective there? And I think that is work that can be undertaken in upcoming months, in years, to refine the objectives and see what is actually required for each of the systems.
Thank you. Follow up, Director Lee. Yeah.
Do we have a percentage of savings for each stage of water restrictions? Like, is it like, do we save 10% going from 2 to 3 and another 10% from 3 to 4?
Good question.
Thank you for the question. Based on empirical insights, it really depends on the time of the year that a stage is cold. If it's stage 2 is cold in July, community response is different than when stage 2 is cold in June. Usually in June, there's a heightened awareness that, oops, we might be in for a long one. And in stage 3, usually the jump from stage 1 to stage 2 is the biggest because of lawn watering. Stage 2 to stage 3 is less. And stage 4 is, again, usually a little bit bigger because people really realize that things are getting dire.
Thank you. And I know that, yeah, in the way we've structured the regulator, the conservation measures and the messaging, like, people expect, so to speak, us to go to stage 4 every year, but operationally, you know, I would think, and I'll look to GM Rosenboom, staff still considered stage 4 to be sort of an emergency situation. Like, that is the intention. And so I actually agree with Director McMahon. Like, I personally have no issues with the restrictions that are involved in stage 3, and I'm basically following them anyways. But the concern that I have is saying that we're okay with going to stage 3 restrictions is that we're okay with taking the community to the cusp of emergency. And I think that's a bad signal if we intend for stage 4 to remain emergency measures. And I don't know if GM Rosenboom has any comments, you know, in state with regards to stage 4 and operational considerations, but.
Thank you. Stage 4 is a situation that at the staff level definitely always results in stress. Because it stresses the water system, it increased, usually it's very much increases the heightened awareness on our operator level to squeeze every liter per second out of all the systems we have. So if we can avoid that, I think from an operational perspective, we would, I think that's definitely beneficial. Stage 3, does have some impacts on some commercial operators in terms of outdoor use. People, you cannot wash your houses anymore, so sometimes painters are impacted and landscaping companies are impacted. So there are some commercial implications of having stage 3 in place.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And so I was listening to the CBC the other day, and I They were interviewing General Manager Rosenboom's counterpart with, it was either the Capital Regional District or the district of, or the Regional District of Nanaimo. And they were discussing this exact scenario and how, and they had a couple of salient points that the General Manager's already brought up, is that lawns are a water user far above most anything else. And I think that if we can get away from the lawn, we will be better for it for a number of reasons, not just the fact that our pollinators can't get any sustenance out of a lawn, and they get poisoned by them often. One more thing is that they had a catchphrase, it's all water is drinking water. And I think that if we can steal that in our communications, I think that would be something that we can help to educate our water using public. All water is drinking water.
Thank you, Director Bax. Director Gabius, you're the last person I have on the speakers list, and then I'm hoping we can wrap this up because we do still have another item on our agenda.
Yes, I just want to, so we're aiming, basically there's 2 lines on the graph where we want to add capacity so we can guarantee 750 liters per connection per day. And then we also have the line of reduction in use through conservation. So I also think that 750 liters is quite generous, just based on my own use. But if we do make a huge effort of conservation and communication education and rebates and all that, I'm assuming that we'd be able to hit that sweet spot of guaranteeing 750 liters faster and needing less capital projects. Or, I mean, we're always going to be looking for more water because of growth, but I'm assuming that there's, even if we're aiming for 750 liters, conservation will play a big part into what we need in order to get there.
Yes, that's correct. And ultimately, it is the, and I think that's related to, there are so many variables here still at play in terms of what is the impact of a leak resolution, what is exactly, which of the sources ultimately will be the first one that will be developed, and what is that amount? Because they are not all equal. They all will provide additional capacity, but how much the first breach, and if there was a decision or a possibility to develop a second one, which one is that? And there is a difference there between if that second one is a reservoir versus a well. One is instantaneous, and one is just a big amount of water that is depending on a pump. So there's still so much still at play. So that's why staff feels that if we set an objective now, it doesn't mean that it is set in stone for the next 10 years. No, it will need to be reconsidered in 5 years. And I think from a staff perspective, the entire water strategy should be revised in 5 years, by 2030. Just not maybe updated, but looked at to see if everything is still where we want it to be. And if it still meets the desires of the community at that point in time.
Thank you very much. Director McMahon.
So I know this isn't, this is a work in progress, and I understand they aren't perfect targets, but I just want to be the devil's advocate for a little bit longer. When residents come to me and say, oh my God, my utility bill has gone up so much in the last few years, what I say to them is, you ain't seen nothing yet, because we have tens of millions of dollars of projects already on the horizon that we've got to complete. And it's alarming. It's really alarming to me. So I'm concerned about perceptions and expectations. When the province sets the speed limit on the highway, everybody treats it as the minimum speed that you must go. And I fear that a little bit. And then finally, I'm very cognizant of who's paying. So in my area, I have a lot of people with low income who live in small homes. They're using very little water, and they are paying a lot of money. And if we continue to support the really high users, a lot of those high users can actually afford to do things like put in rainwater capture and so forth. So I really, the volumetric billing is going to help somewhat with that, but it's not going to be a magic bullet to reduce the price for the modest users, unfortunately. We can't do that. So all of these projects are going to increase our costs, and therefore, I'm totally behind redundancy. We have to have it, but I just want to manage public expectations.
Thank you, Director McMahon. I don't see any other speakers on the speakers list. Director Lee,
I had one comment that I didn't make last time because it wasn't on subject. But I've been getting some calls on the volumetric billing issue, and it relates directly to our water stages. Some of my higher users are the ones that you wouldn't expect to be higher users, like a single mom with a large garden, and not having the capability of putting water storage in, and very concerned about minimum costs. So it's the high water users aren't necessarily our rich people either. We've got to deal with that, but that's in the future. Anyways, I just wanted to make that point. It's hitting home in my area quite a bit now with that volumetric billing.
for sure. And I think that's part of somebody's got to go first on that front, and I think that's part of the lessons that we'll learn out of the Pender systems is that how do we increase the equity? How do we make it accessible? How do we rein in the wastefulness and whatnot, where it is in the system, right? Like, we also talk about agricultural water policy and the need to develop it, but I don't see anybody with hands up. I'm gonna move the recommendations with the small textual amendments as we've discussed. Otherwise, I'm gonna move them as presented. Thank you, I've got a seconder. Any further discussion on the motion that's currently on the floor to me, Director Bax?
So I'd like the first paragraph of the motion read back, please.
The water supply capacity for all systems is such that an average monthly residential water demand of 750 liters per connection per day can be guaranteed.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
That's all.
you do your job. Don't worry about what staff are up to, all right? Director McMahon.
Would we like to add a number 4 that these water supply objectives be reviewed in 2030?
I think let's vote on what's on the floor now, and then maybe if we want to, we can add a fourth, but GM Rosenboom, I see your hand.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would suggest staff will recommend that the water strategy in its entirety will be reviewed by 2030. So when the water strategy will come forward, that will be part of the recommendation to the board.
Thank you. That's right. This is data to insert into the water strategy. We still have to actually approve the water strategy. Okay, I don't see any other speakers to the motion, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, GM Rosenboom. Bit of a marathon. But with that, we're going to move on to item 5.2, which is the New Brighton Dock Facility Feasibility Study Update. GM Gagnon, welcome. Did you want to?
I've asked her to unmute.
Okay.
And I've asked her to turn on her.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. The report in front of you is in response to the board's direction from last July to conduct a feasibility study exploring options for ownership and operations of the New Brighton Dock. As per the scope of work that was presented to the board in the fall, this report represents a check-in prior to moving forward with community conversations. Much of the information that is contained within the interim feasibility study may not be new information for many, other than perhaps the financial orders of magnitude for ownership and operations, and what it might look like in terms of examples of different service establishment options. Staff are recommending a public participation process to gather community input and would return to the board with a summary of this input and a final version of the feasibility study to inform next steps. With me today virtually is Jeannie Bradburn from Pacific Coastal Consulting, who is the author of the interim feasibility report. She's here to answer questions about the report, and staff is also here to answer questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Directors, any questions? Director Stanford, I'll just go straight to you.
Thank you. I just have a couple of things to say and then, get into questions. I just want to thank all the work that's gone into this, to staff, to Jeannie, and also to the community members that participated in this initial phase. There's been some back and forth. I want to emphasize that for me, the value of this for the communities is to get all the same information on the same page so everybody knows what they're talking about. And I think that's really helped. A lot of people have come back to me and said, no big surprises here. But it also really clarified that this really should be a provincial transportation priority. It just really keeps going back into that's the ultimate solution. But given that, the challenges that I found with the ideas coming out of the report is it is difficult to clarify how we move forward when we don't fully understand the prioritization of the other docks. Specifically, we could look at the docks in the other regional docks in the Southwest Peninsula. Until we get a prioritization of our current infrastructure, our marine infrastructure, it is hard to figure out where New Brighton fits in all that, unless you are completely versed in living and working and functioning either in the regional district or on Gambier. The other thing that I've noticed is that all the different parties that are involved with this project are all waiting on this feasibility study. And that's been a problem because they're either waiting not to fix the dock and just waiting to see what will happen. Community members are trying to fix the dock and laying various things that they found onto the holes. Everybody's sort of in a wait period. And I'm not sure at the end the feasibility study will actually give them the answers they're wanting. So that's another problem that I'm finding with this particular strategy. But we're the only ones that are actually working on this towards some kind of solution. And finally, the other thing that I noticed with the report is when we're looking at suggestions of how to get revenue from the dock itself, it's often referring back to the same individuals. If you're looking at moorage, if you're looking at increase on ferry tickets, these are all valid, but in the end, it's always the same people it's a layered taxation on the same group of people. And I'm trying to think of ways that could be changed to a certain extent. So those are the kind of primary points that came out of this. I do have some specific questions, but I'll let other people speak to specifics, and then I'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stanford. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about expectations around here, that if we do the community consultation, the community is going to expect that we're going to take on the dock, and I'm pretty sure we're not prepared to do that at this time. certainly I would have a lot of concerns about it. For one thing, New Brighton is a ferry terminal. It runs 365 days a year. And if something goes wrong, it needs to be fixed instantly. Like, that is not the service level we currently provide to our ports. If something goes bluey with the ferry float, we can't leave it for a year and a half while we put out RFPs and stuff, right? And so that would be either a different service or a change to the way that we do port services. So I think we really, we're going to need to move forward some sort of a process to review our ports. I realize that there is a capital infrastructure study going on, and we saw some preliminary numbers on what all the ports need, but we're going to have to review this, because right now it's whatever breaks first is coming to the board, and we don't have a strategy. And if we don't have a strategy or priorities, we can land ourselves in difficulties. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Bax.
Yeah, my community brought up some concerns because we are a 17% funder of the docks. And my answer to them, should they be listening, is that although it's not a service that's available within Area D, it is a service that I've used in the past, other docks I've used, and I know that people within my community are using docks because we are an oceanside village. And I know for a fact that there are a good number of taxpayers on Gambier Island that pay into our transit system that do not often use our transit system. And so I want my constituents to be aware that this is that when we think about trying to separate the services that we offer into the separate areas that we have, if they're not that easily separated, then we're going down a path that can fracture our social network. And I don't want to go down that path. And so I want to let people know that I don't know how the formula came up for our financing the docks, but I'm not prepared to, I will not support abandoning that.
That's excellent to hear, because that's not one of the recommendations for today. So,
But it is, we are talking about the dock system, and this is one of the concerns that I received in email form from several of my constituents.
that's fair. Director Stanford.
So I'll just ask a couple of questions of clarity. I'm not sure who wants to speak to this, but on page 6, there's sort of discussion that because of the lack of tenure on both the ramp and the port facility, that it's open to certain risks. But I was wondering if there's any clarity on what those risks could be.
Perhaps I'll start, and then if our consultant has anything to add, we can turn there. But so the province has indicated to us that those assets can't remain untenured in perpetuity. Something has to be done. So I'm going to start with the ramp because I think they're both very interesting creatures, right? So the ramp was built by Modi, everybody knows that. It was never formally turned over to anybody. There's no transfer of ownership. So what happened when the federal government divested the dock to the nation was that the province signaled the need for the tenure applications. That was not misunderstood, or not understood perhaps initially by the nation, and so tenure applications were never originally submitted until just a few years ago, and there are 2 tenure applications. It has been confirmed by the province that they are 2 separate assets. And although it would make sense that the same owner, from an operations and maintenance perspective, have both tenures, it is not required. They are independent assets of one another. If the nation does not claim any interest or ownership over the barge ramp. So it is currently unmaintained and unowned. Not new news, but I'm just the context. If it is to remain untenured, so if the nation doesn't sign the tenure agreement on the ramp, the province has indicated that would now be considered an abandoned asset and may have to take action. So that's up to the province, what action means. That's as far as I got, but it could, who knows, could be closure, could be they temporarily close it to the public, but they have suggested they would most likely take action if it remains untenured. In terms of the dock, it also remains untenured because the nation hasn't signed the tenure because they're all waiting for us to make a decision on our involvement. So if we come up with a decision that is uninvolvement and we continue to advocate for provincial jurisdiction, the nation may move forward with other options. They have not indicated to me what those options are, but they have certainly indicated, and that letter is in the back of your report, that says they do desire that it remain a community asset to not only the existing community, but to their members as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Stanford, you're the only one on the list, so.
I'd just like to clarify expectations for how public engagement would happen if we are to move forward with the recommendations. What I'm thinking of in particular is people in the Southwest Peninsula, they have a particular interest, and people in Gambier have particular interest. Area F, again, because of different percentage of the budget function for this, different interests, and then, of course, the region as a whole. If any kind of public engagement could start with the islands, or specifically with the Southwest Peninsula, given that they would be able to flesh out their understanding, their potential view of how they could participate. It would then give the other larger engagement a way of perceiving more accurately the importance of this dock, as well as ways that the community potentially could participate. That we recognize that this is, nobody wants the dock. New Brighton absolutely requires the dock. At the same time, it is such a big asset that it would be almost impossible to deal with by themselves. So we're all trying to make something work, and we want to be able to communicate that to the wider community that's being engaged on this. So I'm not sure what the expectations for engagement is, but would that be a consideration of how this would move forward?
Thank you, and through the chair. So staff have not developed the engagement strategy yet because we need the direction to do so. I will start by saying that, excuse me, that the board approved $25,000 for the project in its entirety, and a very small portion of that is set aside for engagement. So engagement will be scaled accordingly. But the intent was always and continues to be that there would be intentional engagement on the island, on the Southwest Peninsula in specific, but without having details, not having developed that engagement plan, I guess I can say that we would definitely take this into consideration as we do plot that out. Thank you.
And I did see the GM taking lots of notes, so the comments are being heard for sure. Directors, any other questions? If not, go ahead, Director Stanford.
I have so much more to say, but I also know that we have more opportunities to speak to this. And it's getting late, and I have a feeling there may be questions after the meeting as well. So I'd like to move the recommendations as presented in the report on page 1.
Thank you, and I've got a seconder from the service. So this is voting B, D, E, and F. I don't see any other hands on my speakers list, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, B, D, E, and F, and that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, GM Kenyon. Okay, that takes us to the end of our agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded, all those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from online?
Chair, there's nobody online.
Perfect. We'll see you all at the next one.